This is a Moving Biography podcast, bringing together different perspectives to question disciplinary assumptions and decenter life writing. It is a collaboration between LAWHA at the Orient-Institut Beirut, the American University of Beirut, and the Global Decenter, generously funded by the Volkswagen Foundation. Welcome to today's panel discussion. I'm very happy to see you all here. The panel is on curating an artist and parent's biography. And I'm very to have with us today Hala Schoukair, Manuella Guiragossian, and Mahita El Bacha Urieta. I'm Nadia von Maltzahn. I think you all know me. I direct the LAWHA project here at the Orient-Institut Beirut, which stands for Lebanon's Art World at Home and Abroad. It's a 5-year research project funded by the European Research Council and looks at the evolution of Lebanon's art world in the second half of the 20th century. And the focus is on the trajectories of artists and their works in and from Lebanon since 1943. Today's panel is organized in collaboration with the American University of Beirut. Happy Kirsten Scheid is here, and the Global Decenter. And it is actually the final event of a summer school we held here in Beirut in June last year under the title Moving Biography. The summer school brought together different perspectives to question disciplinary assumptions and decenter life writing. And we are producing 3 podcast episodes as an outcome of the summer school, of which today's discussion will be the basis for one. Moving Biography has been generously funded by the Volkswagen Foundation. Moving Biography focused on 3 main themes: questions of data, the act of creation, and the importance of the social and historical context of biographies. We had 2 keynote events in the run-up to the actual school in June 2022, one in which Tarif Khalidi, the Sheikh Zayed, Professor Emeritus of Arabic and Islamic Studies at AUB, examined the biographical tradition in pre-modern Arabic literature, moderated by Zonia Machiatasi, and the second was a conversation between the writer Jean Said Makdisi and the artist Lina Majdalani, moderated by Kirsten Scheid. The actual summer school that Zonia, Kirsten, and I organized together with Peggy Levitt from the Global Decenter brought together doctoral and postdoctoral researchers from all over the world and was a real hub, I think, for thinking about the meaning and relevance of biography today. So today's panel was initially conceived to take place within the summer school, but we then decided to hold it as a separate event to give us more space for discussion. During the summer school, we visited the of Arif Reyes and started thinking about what it means to curate an artist's biography. Today, we would like to go into more depth, and it's my great pleasure to introduce our panelists, the daughters of Amine El Bacha, Guiragossian, and Saloua Raouda Choucair, all leading artists of Lebanon's art world. We'll talk about the responsibility of taking care of their parents' legacy, what challenges they face in organizing an artist estate in Lebanon, and what it means to curate a biography that is intrinsically linked to their own. We will start today with brief presentations in which Mahita, Manuela, and Hala will introduce us to their artist parent and how they're taking care of their legacy, and then followed by a discussion and questions from the floor. I very briefly introduce each speaker. So Mahita El Bacha Urieta is a curator and cultural design and policy specialist who has worked internationally for over 25 years. She's recently retrained as a psychotherapist and life coach and runs her private practice out of Madrid, Spain. And I'm very happy she came here today for this event. She's one of Lebanese artist Amine El Bacha's 3 daughters and a member of the board of directors of the Amine El Bacha Foundation, which is responsible for the management and promotion of the late artist estate. Manuella Guiragossian was born in Lebanon, received her earliest training in the studio of her father, Paul Guiragossian. She had her first solo exhibition in Paris in 1989 and went on to graduate from the California Institute of the Arts in 2002 with a BFA in film and video, specializing in character animation. She has exhibited globally for over 3 decades. After her father's passing in 1993, she began researching and archiving his life and works, and founded in 2011 the Paul Guiragossian Foundation with her family. Hala Schoukair also grew up in Beirut before going on to receive a master's degree in cinematographic studies from the Sorbonne University in Paris. She lived in Beirut in the 1980s, where she worked on film production and window dressing, and later moved to the United States and became a visual artist. and moved back here, and is, as I mentioned, the daughter of Saloua Raouda Choucair, and chairs the foundation commemorating her mother's legacy. So without further ado, I will pass the word to Mahita.
Yeah, thank you very much, Nadia, for the invitation and for enabling the beginning of a relationship, I would imagine, for ourselves. Yeah, it's quite special to be next to like-minded ladies and people who are in a very similar situation to ours, although we will see how we differ later on. So I won't spend too much time introducing my father because I believe that you all know the work and his story. I will just speak about the vision that he had for what he always wanted to have as an art foundation after his passing. So my father passed away in 2019, but from very early on, he always wanted the core of his artwork to stay collected together and for people to be able to experience it in a way that gives them a real sense of the breadth of what he was about and his aesthetic and his spirit. The art estate today is made up of really large numbers, thousands of artworks, from oil paintings to watercolors, lots of works on paper, China ink, drawings, collages, gouaches, and there are also lots of objects. He was very interested in functionality and design. He collaborated a lot with tapestry makers, jewelry makers, photographers. So there's a lot of works that we can generally speak of as objects. There are also in the collection original writings of his. So lots of he used to write a lot from a young age, and later on towards the 80s, he started to contribute to newspapers and write in regular columns. He would illustrate as well. And later on, he published a few books as well about short stories and things like that. So writing was always a passion, as well as music, as well as his own sort of original handwritten notes and articles and texts. There are archival materials, of course, the usual press cuttings and sketches preparations he would have done for some artworks, writings to do with installations and things like that. We also have collected quite a few things, like a lot of artists who like to be surrounded by objects that speak to them in their studio. There's little Japanese dolls, fossils, stones, textiles, variety of different types of textiles. The chairs he used to sit on to paint, easels, the kind of life of his studio. There's a trace of that as well in the estate. And then personal objects and collections with his CDs. He used to love classical Arabic music and classical European music. So there's a big collection of those and records, his favorite books, all that kind of stuff. So it's a very varied estate and it's quite large. The majority of it is in Beirut at the moment. There are some in Spain, and obviously there's a great deal in collections all over the world, in some institutional collections, museum collections, and also in many private foundations and private family collections. As a family, I had 3 daughters. I'm the youngest, not so young anymore. My sister Fatima is here as well. She's the eldest. and our mom, Angelina, who is really the custodian number 1 of the collection and of my father's memory. My sister lives in Cyprus. Luckily, it's not too far, so it's easy for her to come in and out of Lebanon. I live in Madrid at the moment, and my mom is based in Beirut. So as I'll speak later, it's a little bit of a challenge, our reality. But from our friends here, we've already talked about the challenge of that. The reality of being Lebanese means that sometimes we've had to leave, and that today presents a real challenge in terms of doing justice to the estate and the legacy of our fathers and our mothers. So the main activities that we're currently involved in, really early beginnings still, although we started a few years ago, but it's been a slow progress because of our circumstances as a family and also as a country. Do conservation work wherever and however we can to really look after the storage of Bacha's work, keeping the conditions. This is the primary care, that he is just the object, looking after the object before anything else in the artworks. Inventorying We started the inventory a few years ago, but it's been very slow moving. We're hoping to really push now with that. Influencing the field where possible. There's a lot of sales and auctions and acquisitions and all sorts of things that happen with works that, of course, we're connected with, but they're not ours anymore. But we try to influence where possible. We get contacted by private collectors, by museums, by curators, conservationists, critics for advice, for authentication of works and all sorts of things like that. So we're always extremely open and as active as we can to respond to these demands. And we support institutions, again, similarly. Of course, a lot of the museums in the Gulf that have been a bit more active and have had the means to really push the interpretation work, conservation work a bit faster than other parts of the world, have been quite active and are often in touch, again, to complete their archive, to gather documentation, etc. And we look forward to doing a bit more of this here in Lebanon with all the growing institutions that are currently being worked on. Also, keeping the work of our father visible where possible. So we're very open to doing exhibitions, supporting even physically, actively, co-curating, helping to interpret wherever it's needed to really keep the work visible on any level. And then authentication of artworks. There's been, which I'm sure we'll talk about that later, the number of copies that there are in the art market has been astounding to us. And I think it's been growing over the past years. I don't know if it's something that grows after the artist passes. In our experience, it has grown after our father passed away, the number of copies and fakes. I believe that this is also a reflection probably of the situation in the country and perhaps the situation in some areas of the art market. We're not entirely sure, but we're definitely observing a frightening increase. And we don't always get asked for authentication, but wherever we can and we see something, we really try to react and try to stop. So we encourage anybody to contact us if you ever see something that you don't think seems original, to check, because it's not fair to the collection and to the legacy of the artist for this to be allowed. So the main thing that we're doing is planning for the future. Of course, we would have liked to be more advanced at the moment, but as they say, everything happens for a reason, and there are circumstances beyond our control in a way that meant that we still have a lot to do with regards to the Amine El Bacha Foundation. So the foundation was established as a legal entity. مؤسسة is the legal status. We started working on it in 2013, but we got formed as a board of directors, etc. in 2016. Really, that's when it existed as an entity. The vision for the foundation, as I said earlier, that our father he always dreamt. I remember being children, we used to go to all sorts of foundations with him, around Europe in particular, places like the Mahita Foundation. He loved Paul Klee, and his foundation in Bern. Foundation Giacometti in Paris has a very different model, is also very beautiful, it's very personal, it's very intimate. So he really dreamt of having a space like this for him. For him, it wasn't about scale. It really was about space that really felt like you were immersed in his work. So for us as a family, this is what we would like to do. In spite of the limitations, we still hope to make this a reality. The idea would be of an art institution that houses the core art collection. So there are works from very early on that my father said, this will never leave. This has to be in the heart of a foundation at one point. So there are works that are kept for a permanent collection one day somewhere. And those don't get sold, they don't get shown, etc. The idea is that there would be a small, the dream is a beautiful old building in the heart of Beirut somewhere. And for a permanent collection to be there, to have rotating exhibitions, and then to have a program of temporary exhibitions of curated topics around his work, but also for that to be the heart of a wider cultural artistic organization that really is a cultural and social space for Beirut, because Beirut was very much his city, and he saw himself very much as a piece of Beirut. So we see it as the part of the heartbeat, the cultural heartbeat of Beirut, part of all these other institutions that already exist. And then to also have activities around to welcome other artists' work that have a natural affinity to the work of El Bacha. And the idea is to mediate his work dynamically, to have a presence online, all the typical things of a dynamic art organization, no matter the scale. Yeah, so the typical activities, I don't want to take too long, but the typical activities would be around the continual conservation of the works, loans, be very open to exchanging and loaning long terms, medium terms, short terms to institutions locally, museums, regionally and internationally, to help develop educational content around his work, but also the work of the era he was part of, which similar to the work that Nadia, you've been doing. To, of course, continue to work on the archive and to make it available, to have a physical archive in the foundation, but also an online archive. To welcome residencies of people who want to engage with Beirut maybe, but in dialogue with the collection, or really work on his art or the art of that period that he was part of, to organize exhibitions, permanent, seasonal, wider art programs and publications. So we're very keen now to start to work on some publications. Of course, a monographic book would be very important, the Catalogue Raisonné, which is a much longer term process, but also thematic exhibitions and booklets, things like that. So in terms of our immediate priorities, they are the basics. We have had a website for quite a few years that is definitely in need of rejuvenation. And now we'd like to be visible as the foundation, because the whole objective is different now, of a presence on the internet. And there is emergency conservation work that needs to be done. And we're very pleased to know that a lot of organizations are already working on their own collections that contain works by Amine El Bacha, but we need to do ours on the collection. Especially the paper-based works are in need, as many of you work on this know. Dust, so much conservation work needs doing. So we've started on that, and we need to continue urgently. We also need, of course, we have lawyers, but we also are always interested in having adequate representation of people who have an experience with that kind of work, and they're not many. We also are exploring now how best to make that work for us, completing the inventory, which we started, and rendering it accessible. And Nadia, some of the work that you've done, we've said we're very open to it being made accessible. So we're happy for others to make the work accessible in whatever way they can. It doesn't all have to be under the foundation. Yes, and we're also interested in long-term institutional and project-based partnerships, as I said before. Yeah, so I think I've spoken about an aspect of this is also having the funds. An aspect, I would say, is a very fundamental aspect. Having the funds to do all of this work. There are commercial avenues and there are non-commercial avenues. There is one part that I'm very keen on, is that yes, this is the legacy of an artist who has a family, etc. He had exhibitions, he had commercial exhibitions, there were sales. Our schools were paid off by his artwork and my mom's work as well. There is that side of things, but there also the fact that our parents are part of a heritage. Art heritage, living heritage, artistic, cultural, regional heritage. And so there is definitely a moral obligation from the governmental, cultural authorities and non-for-profit foundations that have interest in preserving such heritage and art and material culture, really, which is part of what our parents' work constitutes. So we are looking at both. We will have to continue to sell some artworks. Of course, the ones that are from the foundation will never be touched commercially. But some artworks need to be sold in order to be able to subsidize some of the work that he's doing. So it's about the survival of the foundation in the long term. And the non-for-profit foundations, there are many. We've been researching them for years, and we started dialogue with some of them and help with inventorizing, with making things accessible online. So we're looking at both avenues here. There are other things that I put at the bottom of how can we do more poetically, as it were, about commemorating our parents. And I was thinking about naming streets in Beirut. Or my father works on several public art projects that didn't get realized. Some got very close to getting realized, public fountains, playgrounds for children. There are some beautiful ideas that he had. And there were some maquettes even in existence, mosaics, so many projects. He actually did some public artworks in Italy and in Spain and in France, but he doesn't have any in Lebanon. So these are things that we'd like to try to do on his behalf to really tie him even further in Lebanon, even after his passing, and for the long term. So I think I'll leave it here for now. Thank you.
My name is Manuella Guiragossian. I'm the youngest of Paul Guiragossian's children. I'm a bit more like my father in terms of more spontaneous approach. But of course, everything Mahita just spoke about, we've been working on and anticipating for and hoping. The idea of our foundation began long ago. This year marks 30 years since my father passed in 1993. This November will be that anniversary on November 20. A couple of years after my father passed away, I didn't do anything for 2 years. It was a very traumatic experience for me because I was very close with him. So when I got accepted and went to California to study, I missed my father. And since I'm the youngest, I was very keen to understand or learn more about his early years before I was around, how he succeeded, where he started. I knew a lot of stories that went through in the family, but I wasn't there and I wanted to experience that. And basically, I wanted to get to know my father a bit better because he passed away when I just turned 21. So my entire childhood was with him. My teenage years was with him, and I grew up in his studio. But I wanted to know more as an adult. I wanted to know Paul more. So what I did is, as a film student, I bought myself a camcorder, and I started contacting a lot of people that are living in California who had either left throughout during the war, went to the States, moved their paintings, former students, friends, a lot of these people. And I started going and interviewing them. We're talking 1996, 97 and onwards. This was purely for me. And I started to get to know my father, how he was a young teacher for a lot of very successful people that grew up and became art designers, toy makers, filmmakers, so many different fields. And everybody was very much impacted by Paul, and everybody had a fantastic story to tell. So I was recording these. I also sat down with artists, younger artists that he supported, like Seta Manoukian. At the time, she was living in Los Angeles. I have a beautiful video interview with her in Armenian, where she talked about her childhood, how she was a Paul's student, how he supported and encouraged her, how she got her scholarship through his support, went to study in Italy, and a lot of stories. When I came back to Beirut, I went to visit a lot of other artist friends, Sisi Sir, poets, writers, Christian Ghazi, Jalal Khouri. I sat with a lot of these people and did interviews, audio interviews, video interviews. I was just dying to learn how my father started and in his youth, what happened in Beirut. And little did I know that I was already starting something that is gathering archival and historical testimonies. And all these people were not only telling me how they met Paul, how his path to success began, but how they also, each one had some kind of impact and collaboration. Paul worked with a lot of different fields, and this is what I love about his art, is that he didn't stop just with painting. He went into poetry, he went into theater, he went into film. So many different fields that I discovered that he was part of. He collaborated with Fayrouz, he collaborated with the great play directors, Unsi al-Hajj, Jalal Khouri, Usama al-Arif, so many greats and collaborations. I was just doing some research yesterday about a painting that is currently being exhibited at the Mathaf Modern, part of the Beirut and the Golden 60s exhibition, about this painting where it's a funeral of Abdel Nasser from 1970. So in 1970, the Actors Theater Workshop decides to come up with this very avant-garde idea of making a play, but not in a theater, but in the Hotel Normandie. And so they approach musicians and poets and different fields of people to do some kind of activity, like a cultural event that compiled all of these together. And so they asked Paul to do an exhibition. And in all the articles, you see very specifically, this is not a backdrop for the play, but basically you can say the play was a front drop for the exhibition. So it was more of a collaboration, and the dream of Paul, because he was living in a small studio and house in Bush Hamoud at the time, was to do giant canvases. So the ballroom of the Normandy was emptied for this event, and he did these massive 3 to 4 5 meter large diptychs and triptychs right there on the floor. And he did this within a short amount of time, and this painting was one of those in that project. He just did what he wanted. He painted the life, as he always did: life, death, marriage, children, love, all of these topics. And to go back a little, I just added some pictures in my presentation. You don't have text. You don't have any chronological points. But basically, Mahita, I think, covered everything we're all struggling with. We're doing and gathering archival material, digitizing everything. We've been digitizing all my father's archive for 10 years and still ongoing. Fortunately, both my parents collected a lot of material when they were doing exhibitions. They were always together. So they had photos, newspaper clippings, writings, letters, invite cards. A lot of times that was very interesting when they had the list of titles of the paintings. My mom would write who bought what painting. So this has been fantastic because I've been rediscovering who owns some paintings and get in touch with them and see if they still have these works and photograph. So for the past, I don't know, since the 90s, I've been collecting pictures of paintings everywhere in the world. And it's amazing that my dad's been collected by so many different nationalities. It's not just Armenians or Lebanese or Arabs. It's French, it's Americans, it's Pakistanis, it's everybody. There is no one cultural or one regional area that is specific. Everybody who met Paul, and he's done a lot of exhibitions all over the world. He was invited multiple times by many governments, and him and my mom would travel there, tour the country, do an exhibition. So many amazing stories that I've been gathering, both from interviews from other people. So I dream of making a movie about this, because this is really, my dad passed away at the age of 67. It wasn't very old. But within this short life, and with a very difficult youth and beginning, with a lot of heartache and pain, this guy came out, I don't know, inspiring loads of people and artists and art lovers. His approach and view to life was very different. He gave conferences and lectures with every opening of exhibition everywhere, whether it's in Kuwait, it's in Syria, it's in Iraq, it's in the States, at the United Nations. He became also an advocate of peace. He was always against violence, so he collaborated with a lot of international peace organizations, like against the atomic bomb, L'Appel des Sangs, against the war on Vietnam, where they have this postcard that he did, a China ink of a child reaching up to the birds, and the birds are airplanes dropping bombs. And they made this into a postcard, a committee that is in solidarity with Vietnam. And this was sent to the president in the United States at the time, which pushed the ambassadors here to come and invite Paul officially to go to the States, tour the country, see all its cultural institutions, and change his mind about what the States does or is. This is, when you read this and when you see these letters, these people are seriously worried to change this man's opinion with one drawing that can do so much. I'm very impressed as a researcher, I became a researcher, by the influence Paul Guiragossian had, not only on art, but in politics, in so many different aspects of things, and not just in this country, but internationally. Speeches in the States, in the United Nations, speeches in the Soviet Union at the time, in the mid-80s. everybody apparently cared a lot about how he thought and what he had to say. And he was very free to talk about his opinions and very clear. And this was a man who could not be influenced by, he never carried any on him. And he was always scared that fame will corrupt his art. And there's a quote I was reading yesterday that we used in one of the exhibitions, that he was really worried that if he gets seduced by the success of making money, that it's going to ruin, it's going to make him forget where he came from and going to forget that he had such a painful and hard life. And that's going to prevent him from speaking about people in that situation. So he wanted to preserve that feeling forever and for the rest of his life. So he was a very humble human being, dressed very humbly. My mom dressed him pretty much. He never went shopping. He didn't care about these things. So he was knighted multiple times by the French government, by the German government, by so many achievements. It's too little to talk about. What we try to do is to protect his legacy, archive the works, photograph, and put together this massive catalogue raisonné that I've been working on for at least 10 years. And I still, if I live long enough, I don't know if I will finish it, but I'm hoping someday a more professional team will join this team and will carry on the work. But I think we did a lot of important legwork by publishing this fantastic, most comprehensive monograph with Sambar Dawil and Til Felgat in 2018. We had been working on this since 2013, on the 20th anniversary of his passing, where we did a massive exhibition in Beirut called Paul Guiragossian, The Human Condition. And so since that time, we worked a lot further to publish a serious book, which corrected a lot of things from before. I'm not going to cover a lot of what Mahita said because we're also working in that direction. We dream of having a space for the foundation. We have also sorted out a collection that's specific for the foundation that is separate from the family's collection. And over the years, we've been also buying some paintings back because Paul's success meant that in the 60s and 70s, he used to sell out on opening nights. And we pretty much don't have any works remaining from certain periods in our collection. And so in the last 20 years, we've been buying works back to include back in our foundation's collection. And some of them have been touring with these collaborations we've been doing with museums and curated shows. We're always interested in working with important historians and curators around the world. People approach us and they're studying about them, which is very important for us to put some information out there where students, researchers, everybody's learning about. And this is not just for Paul's history and his inclusion in the world art history, something that our artists in the region in general have been missing because there hasn't been enough talk and research and inclusion of them and their achievements in art history generally. Nowadays, in the past 10 years, everybody's in haste and in worry about not having all these female artists being included in art history, which is, I have no idea how that happened, because you have amazing female artists that have been doing a lot more than a lot of male artists, sorry, but always have been remaining under shadow, not given their rightful place. So you have a lot missing. Our job collectively, with what we're doing with our parents' work, with what all of us, I think, are doing, is not just to preserve their legacy and archive and do all these things, but for me, it's important for all these artists to take their place in international art history, to be studied. I'm very proud to say that all the work that we've done is starting to be fruitful at this point after 10 years. I get Scottish students, American students, French students, Italians contact us to learn more. They need archives. They're doing their PhDs on Paul. And I'm always curious, where did you learn? Where did you find out? It's as if, what do you mean where? I keep thinking about it later. What do you mean where? These people are out there. They've been in their time exhibiting all over the world. You meet people from that generation that have attended exhibitions and have been so impressed. And that's shocking to me sometimes when I go to Italy and someone says, oh, I was in that exhibition and I met your father in Florence or in Rome and I saw that fascinating exhibition. And I'm excited. I wish I could time travel and be there to see how that went. So by working on this, I memorized the archives. Today, when I look at a painting, I can 90%, if you like, immediately know what period it came from. Something a lot of us didn't have 10 years ago because we didn't have this information scanned and digitized and organized in front of us. I went through this very exciting and painstaking phase of being so immersed in all the pictures, putting together things like black and white pictures, color pictures, what my mom was wearing, what the lighting looked like, what the tiles and the paintings looked like, what's in the newspapers. And so to put together, to understand in which exhibition what went where. Now, today, when we go into our archives, I can take you on each and every about 150 exhibitions. You can go into each file, each exhibition, and attend the opening with pictures, with articles, with sometimes videos and interviews of Paul talking about his art and that exhibition. Today, I am time traveling through this archive to learn what happened then. And a lot of times I come across the other artists and his friends and his colleagues and the people from the same era. And you discover that, oh, this was doing that. And they collaborated, Paul and Nadia Ali in Milano and in Frankfurt. And then Paul and Sisi Serso, they did and Olga Livansky, and they went in the 70s and did a season of portraits at the Bustan Hotel, organized by Galerie L'Amateur. And so many people come to us today. Here's my portrait from that time that your dad did, that so on. So all these connections are very important because these guys were collaborating extensively. They were doing salons together in the early 50s. So a lot has been happening. And why it's important that we each have our parents' stuff organized and then collaborate to see the connections. And then you connect everything, all of this to the other countries in Iraq and Egypt and Syria and all the region, and then to the rest of the world. This is how these people have enriched culture in the entire region. They were teaching, they were educating, they were protesting through their arts, they were activists, they were doing so much that it's a shame for me when people just come and say, oh, we recognize your dad from the personnage that we see in the auctions. That's not it. There's so much more. There's so many more exhibitions and books and videos and documentaries to be done that I dream, of course. What Mahita said about funding these things is, where do I start? We can't end up selling all our collection to fund. So we're trying to find creative ways to, from here and there, to fund what we can. It's a slow process at this point. If we had the proper backup from art patrons, from a proper government, which apparently we never had since way back when, before I was born, because Paul was talking about this, and theater plays were being written about corruption way back in the 60s and 70s. So this hasn't been something new. It's been going on since forever. And these guys were dreaming of museums, modern and contemporary art museums. They were encouraging people to do art history and become art critics because they wanted to create those dialogues. The dialogues were happening actually between the artists, between the poets and the playwrights. So many times I read articles where Jalal Khouri, who's a playwright, was writing an article and criticizing an exhibition that happened in Sursop Museum. Some of the things that you're going to see tomorrow and soon when those come out. But these guys were supporting each other to discuss and educate the people about culture, about wrong and right. Maybe not wrong and right, but more about differences, the right approach, the good artists versus the artist that just picked up a brush and decided to become artists. So you have the deep and the professionals that also were criticizing the others. So there was a platform where people could go to exhibitions and read these things and discover that no, not everything is art, not everything is good. So criticizing each other was going to push the others or even themselves to change and to think about what to do next, how to innovate. And these guys were creating all of that. They were doing the job of the government. They were doing the job of the artist, the historian, the critic, you name it, the curator. It's fascinating to me how they did this. And a lot of times you read these stories. For one time, for example, Dad had to participate in a salon in his early youth. And he had made a massive painting, which he couldn't transport from Hamoud to UNESCO. So Jalal Khouri says they hired a carriage with a horse. At 3 a.m. in the morning, they put the artwork on the carriage and they walked from Burj Hamoud to UNESCO to deliver the painting and hang it. They have all these stories that are so much fun. There were fistfights between artists because they disagreed about Van Gogh's Blue or something. All these stories are amazing and inspiring. Our job today, yes, although difficult to put together and archive and organize, but whoever out of these artists preserved and did so much work just presented us with this treasure. And all we need to do is put it together, give it its importance, and present it to the rest of the world. After that, if Paul is exhibited in museums and talked about everywhere and shown, I will die happy. I will know that I don't have to worry about the next generation continuing this work. A lot of current contemporary artists come and ask me, should we worry that our kids are going to have to do what you've been going through? And I said, think about it, put together your own archive and do the hard work and don't leave this. Don't give your children their own life. So I'm not going to enter too much into my father's biography. It's everywhere. It's in this book. It's online. But this is a little bit tapping around what it's been taking to put this foundation together. The fakes were initially later in 2006 and onwards are what pushed me to angrily decide to concretely get back to Lebanon and start archiving and digitizing. Fortunately, by authenticating with the extensive research and certificates that we issue, collectors and auctions and everybody is relying a lot on our foundation's research and authentication. And the collectors are refusing to buy anything that doesn't come with a foundation-issued certificate. Even if certificates issued by my family before the foundation, I can say very honestly that a lot of times these were not researched, but these were based on my family members' memory or single expertise, if you like. If one of us, if let's say my sister or my brother or somebody or my mom, someone came and they thought, yes, this is a good piece, yes, it's authentic. What's the title? What's the date? It's approximate, and it's maybe a thought of title and not actual title. Even in my father's time, just so everybody knows, he wasn't big on titling stuff. So a lot of these poets and intellectual bodies of his that helped him do these exhibitions titled the works together. But what's important is that during each exhibition, there was a specific theme that Paul was discussing and working and talking about. What we read in these interviews a lot of times helps us know what the theme of this exhibition was. And so, therefore, if we can't find a title, we will go back into the interviews and into what he was talking about and find out what the work is about. Many times, collectors and owners of paintings, they know that this is a real painting. Agreed. But they don't know. Do they know what year this painting was produced? No. They invent their own titles. Sometimes it's something that my father would have never even. It's not in his vocabulary to title like that. So they put names like the weeping woman over Palestine who was crying. What? Paul was very subtle about his opinions, and even if he was speaking directly about an event or a political issue, it was never literal. And so we have all these confrontations very often with people who try to take things in their own hands. It's a struggle, but it's been getting better. And we're finding a lot more collaboration from a lot of people that are in the art industry today, which I'm very happy about, because in the end, a lot of people contribute also things. Some people, they kept newspaper clippings or photos, important videos. Someone in the 90s visited my father to have a chat with him and brought with her a friend who had a camcorder. And today that video, although unedited and very spontaneously filmed, has a treasure in there from 1991, where they went into the studio, they filmed what's on the walls, they filmed Paul talking about his early years and the current years, his frustration with war and how one of his portraits got damaged by a bomb that hit his studio, which is going to be exhibited tomorrow at Cerso, and that he restored. And then they went back to Burj Hammoud, to his old studio of his youth, and he opened the doors, and then he pulls out his sketch pad and then starts sketching the new neighbors that don't know who he is with their children. This is a huge, massive contribution of this guy who had no idea that what he was filming 10, 20 years ago. And today we extensively use that video to showcase so many things. So contributions and collectors, friends, people, all of this, all of us together need to put together the history of our parents, of our treasures, because this is all we got. In Lebanon, everything else is not working, but at least maybe we can get this working. And this is something to be proud of. That's my 2 cents on this.
Okay, I'm going to do a very boring presentation. I wasn't prepared that much. So I'm going to read my state of mind, which is very narrow in the time being, which is a little bit the archive and details. Thank you all for being here. And thank you, Nadia, for inviting me among my peers and for trying to eventually structure what we are organically improvising. Archiving is an endless process, and that keeps procreating, and the lack of a guiding mentor or a system makes it even more difficult, at least for me. My mother, for me personally, is a project that is always in the making. All her art pieces constitute projects to be continued. They have their own potential and demand my full involvement. So being her daughter is an act that I keep learning. When I used to visit her while I was living in New York and sit with her, after her few minutes of delight she had for seeing me, she would ask me about my plans for the day and what my projects are and what I'm working on. I could feel a mixture of her ambition and her frustration that makes me want to borrow the word daughtering in my role as her daughter. I would introduce my mother briefly because she's so old, I feel nobody knows her. Saloua was born in 1916 in Ras Beirut, in a house surrounded by a garden, located where the lower campus of the American University of Beirut is right now. She was the youngest in her family. Her father died while serving in the Ottoman army when she was just 1 year old. She was raised by a strong-willed single mom who had tried many times to save her husband from the army by bribing the soldiers until it didn't work out. He was conscripted and died in 1917. My grandmother valued education and vowed to raise her daughters in the best schools despite all the obstacles a young widow had to face. Mother was a tomboy. She liked sports and was a good swimmer. She enjoyed math at school and spent most of her drawing classes at the door because she did not like tracing, as some teachers would ask students to do. So later she took art classes with 2 prominent artists, Farrokh and Unsi, and graduated with a degree in biology from the American Junior College for Women, which is LAU now. She then worked at the AUB library where she read books and journals and was allowed to take classes. In one of those philosophy courses, she was provoked by a professor who described Islamic art as inferior. So she built an independent research agenda exploring Arabic culture. She concluded that abstraction and the idea of infinity were at the core of Islam, so its representation of the world was different and it looks into the essence of everything. When I started this process of learning about mother around 20 years ago, I thought I was done. I had finally published a book about her art after years of work. The project took a huge deal of effort, including 2 sets of photographers, 2 designers, and 2 years for Jacques Aswad to finish his beautiful text. The book contained most of Mother's work in a single volume, and she absolutely loved it. She signed it in an impressive lunch party at Masrah al-Madina in Beirut in December 2002, and I was relieved with a great sense of accomplishment. Then came an event I was dreading in 2007 when we had to move from the original family house. The original family house, I don't know.
No, I haven't. Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is where we used to live. Yani too bad we don't have it, because that would have been, yeah. I had to pack my mother and her studio and move them to a smaller apartment. It was a big loss to leave the building, as every corner and every red tile was full of memories. It was where my mother, her sister, and her brother and their mother had lived since 1949, where they had their families and where my mother's studio was. It was such a unique setting. Packing and moving was a daunting task. I left behind many items, although I wanted to keep everything, even those red tiles. Every now and then I remember and mourn this item or that, such as her chair that was always covered with clay. Recently, I started regretting not removing from the bathroom walls the 2 wooden boxes Mother had made for toiletry. The doors were mirrors that moved in a certain way, allowing her to stand between the 2 adjusted mirrors to see her hair from front and back. This is how she used to cut her hair by herself. It seems she had planned to never visit a hairdresser. I consider this part of her artistic expression, as she had no writing about feminism and never talked about the subject or mingled with groups of feminist artists. This also proved the limits of the written archives. So I wish I had movies and things, because I don't have archives.
We make some.
Yet the archiving process generates new finds. For example, the preparation for a 2011 retrospective at the Beirut Exhibition Center showing all of Mother's work plunged me into her archives again. Looking into her files, I discovered drawings of nudes she made as a student, silkscreen scarves she made that I found in the back of a drawer, in addition to other treasures. It was such a beauty. Having all her artwork on display was such a feast to the eye. Later on, while curator Jessica Morgan from the Tate Modern was looking with me into old photographs, she noticed the detailed Arabic notes that Mother wrote on the back of some picture that, unknown to me, she had taken at Le Corbusier City Radieuse in Marseille while it was being built in 1948. This inspired Jessica to write the introduction to the monograph for Mother's 2013 show. Mother was the first artist from the Arab world to have a major solo show at the Tate, which went on for 7 months. This collaboration made me understand new chords in Mother's thinking. It made me recognize that having a new pair of eyes looking with me and explaining the value of what's in the archive is an experience that I want to keep enjoying. Every time I am in a situation like this, as much as I dread the complexity and the nostalgic feeling that comes with it, I find myself enriched. Her house was affected by the August 4 blast. So in a panic mode, I moved everything out of Beirut to a place built specifically to host Mother's work and archive. So now her art, her furniture, and her tools are back together along with the paper archives. Unpacking later made me realize how confusing all those files are, as Mother would store things in plastic bags and envelopes. Only now have I started housing them in archival boxes. I also had problems with organizing the exhibition, reviews, and articles. Mother had the habit of jotting notes on the margin of some articles that researchers and I have overlooked and dispersed, without taking into consideration how they were collected. So I need to go back and find another way to classify them. Sorry, I'm too much into details and how to, There are so many layers that need to converge at the same time, and I can't wait to have a system and a small team just to be able to locate and preserve her papers at the same times. I don't want to finish this. Okay, now after 20 years of the process of preserving, caring, and carrying the legacy of Saloua Raouda Choucair, I'm faced with new sets of challenges. Some I have already mentioned, and others I am sure encounter while running the foundation. I feel that I am still at the beginning. In addition, I am myself pursuing my life as an artist, so I am in a totally different set of mind, and my biography as her daughter takes a completely different turn. This because I talked also about the picture archive, because there is somebody who is doing a book about how my mother took a picture of her artwork. So these photos, as I quote this researcher, are not just documentation, but rather visual viewing instruction in which Choucair articulates her working methods and ideology without using language. We'll find out later when she published the book this is what we need. We need people to research, to look into things, because, okay, I looked at them. And then what? You need somebody who will come and say, oh, I can relate to this, or I can situate this in which context. So we need people to come and look with us. So I'm organizing, I'm doing, it's okay. And then, so this is it.
This is so exciting, actually.
Yeah.
Maybe just because
so my mother also is a Beiruti,
Yeah.
very much Beiruti, but I'm sorry, I had to take her to the mountains, which is nice. But for example, this is her sculpture that was remade into a fence for the place. So this is how she wanted to be. This is her expression. So this is part of the sculpture, divided and multiplied. And this is the student, the first student who came. And this is the entrance of the foundation. Yeah. And this is not organized. So eventually this will happen. So I'm trying. I'm
So modest. You've done so much of
Amazing.
yeah, thank you. So eventually, yeah, this is the biggest. But she always said, I wanted them 17 meters.
It's
You
probably
trust-
very hard also to work, because your mom is a sculptor and you
Yeah.
have these big structures.
Yeah.
It's not just drawings and paintings.
You just turn on the thing. Yeah. Thank you so much to all three of you. And I think you already answered actually most of the questions I had, because it's so clear how your own biographies are connected to your parents' biographies, of course, but also in the way you approach looking after the legacy. And I think we have also seen the work at different stages, and you very nicely unearthed how you went around dealing with this responsibility also, and the wish also for a space in Beirut, and then actually realizing something in the mountains. I wanted,
before the steps, I went through all
of course,
the anxieties.
of course. So
It's nice to know it will happen.
Yes,
It
yeah.
can be, yeah.
this is why it's nice to see this as a kind of a
Yeah.
potential result. We're not going to go into too many details. This was some points that Mahita prepared, actually what is involved from a family's perspective, and we already addressed quite a lot of these. But I just wanted to maybe go a little bit more to this question of to what extent your parent was involved in setting the visions. With Mahita, you actually set up the foundation with your father. And then Manuella, you were saying how you went on this quest kind of for your father's life in a way after, and then set up the foundation later together with your family.
Yeah,
And
I did with her because she really wanted me to take care of enlarging. Yeah, that was, so she had a lawyer and everybody to enlarge her pieces. So that was her fear. And she wrote, I want them in every city in the Arab world. I need a big enlarge. And so I'm working on those public sculptures that she would like to. Yeah, she didn't much care about her archives. And her vision was to have her pieces. And she was very worried. The anxiety that they lived in, especially during the war, it was exhausting to have her always worried about what's going to happen. It's other than what happened already, but it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy for them to think about their legacy, and there was no recognition, nothing. It is hard.
thank you all. Thank you.
This is a Moving Biography podcast, bringing together different perspectives to question disciplinary assumptions and decenter life writing.
It is a collaboration between LAWHA at the Orient-Institut Beirut, the American University of Beirut, and the Global D Center, generously funded by the Volkswagen Foundation.